The Long Island serial killer case, also known as the Gilgo Beach killer investigation, has gripped public attention for over a decade. Between 1996 and 2010, the bodies of 10 to 16 women were discovered along a remote stretch of Ocean Parkway on Long Island's South Shore. The victims were primarily sex workers, leading many to believe the killer targeted vulnerable individuals. The investigation began in 2010 when 24-year-old Shannon Gilbert disappeared after meeting a man, Joseph Brewer, in Oak Beach. Her disappearance led to the discovery of the remains of other women, all linked to the same area. Over time, authorities uncovered the remains of multiple victims, sparking fears of a serial killer at large. Despite numerous leads and theories, the killer's identity remains unknown, and the investigation continues. The case is one of the most chilling unsolved serial killings in U.S. history, leaving families searching for closure and the public haunted by its grim mystery. Shortly after Shannon Gilbert's arrival in Oak Beach, her behavior became increasingly erratic. In a panic, she made a 911 call, claiming someone was trying to kill her. Desperate, Gilbert ran through the neighborhood, banging on doors and screaming for help, before disappearing into the night. Despite the urgency of her call and growing concerns from her family, law enforcement initially treated her case as a routine missing persons report, suggesting she may have fled or died accidentally. What seemed like a typical missing person case would soon unfold into one of the most disturbing serial killer investigations in modern U.S. history, the chilling discoveries along Gilgo Beach in 2010. 7 months after Gilbert's disappearance, on the 11th of December, 2010, police, while conducting a search for her along Ocean Parkway, made a grim discovery: the skeletal remains of a woman wrapped in burlap. Within the next few days, 3 more bodies were found in the same vicinity, all within a quarter-mile stretch of Gilgo Beach. These women were quickly identified as missing sex workers, each one having vanished between 2007 and 2010. Among the victims were Maureen Brainerd Barnes, 25, from Connecticut, who disappeared in July 2007, and Melissa Bartholomew, 24, a sex worker from the Bronx who was last seen in July 2009. Megan Waterman, 22, last seen in June 2010, from Maine. Amber Lynn Costello, 27, a North Babylon, New York resident, last seen in September 2010. The discovery of these bodies led authorities to a chilling conclusion: they were likely dealing with a serial killer who had been targeting vulnerable women, particularly sex workers. In the months that followed, police expanded their search, combing the desolate stretches of marshland and brush along Ocean Parkway. By spring 2011, 6 more sets of remains had been found, bringing the total number of known victims to 10. The additional remains were identified as Jane Doe. 6 partial remains found in Manorville in 2000 matched those discovered at Gilgo Beach. John Doe, an unidentified Asian male, believed to have been between 17 and 23 years old, who was killed several years earlier. Jane Doe 3, also known as Peaches, found in Nassau County in 1997 and connected to remains discovered in 2011. Baby Doe, the skeletal remains of a toddler, found wrapped in a blanket near the body of Peaches, possibly her daughter. Jane Doe, 7 partial remains found in both Manorville in 2003 and Gilgo Beach in 2011. These discoveries, while horrifying, indicated that the killer had likely been active for many years, possibly even before 2007, when the earliest of the Gilgo Beach victims were reported missing. On the 13th of December 2011, over a year after her disappearance, Shannon Gilbert's remains were finally found in a marshy area not far from the other bodies. However, her cause of death has remained a point of debate. Police suggested that Gilbert's death was accidental, perhaps caused by exposure or drowning after she ran into the marsh and became disoriented. Her family, however, disagreed, maintaining that Shannon was also a victim of the serial killer. An independent autopsy commissioned by her family suggested that she may have been strangled, though the official cause of death remains undetermined. Whether or not Gilbert was indeed one of the Long Island serial killer's victims continues to be a subject of speculation. As investigators pieced together the victims' profiles, a disturbing pattern emerged. Most of the victims were young women involved in sex work, many of whom advertised their services on websites like Craigslist or Backpage. The killer targeted these vulnerable individuals, luring them with promises of work, only to murder them and dispose of their remains along the secluded shores of Gilgo Beach. Several of the victims were petite, weighing around 100 pounds, and all disappeared after arranging meetings with clients. The bodies were often wrapped in burlap, suggesting a methodical and organized killer who had premeditated the disposal of his victims. Over the years, various theories have emerged regarding the identity of the Long Island serial killer. Some suggest the killer could be a local resident with intimate knowledge of the area, while others have speculated that he may have law enforcement or military experience, given the precision with which he carried out the crimes. Joseph Brewer, the last client of Shannon Gilbert, was initially considered a suspect, as he was one of the last people to see her alive. However, Brewer has consistently denied any involvement in the murders, and no concrete evidence links him to the killings. Dr. Peter Hackett. Another person of interest was Dr. Peter Hackett, a former Oak Beach resident who allegedly called Shannon Gilbert's mother shortly after her disappearance, claiming that he had run a home for troubled women and had cared for Shannon the night she vanished. Hackett later denied making the call and claimed he had no involvement in the case, though his behavior raised suspicion. Gilbert's family even filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Hackett, though he was never charged with any crime related to the murders. James Burke. James Burke, the former Suffolk County police chief, became a controversial figure in the investigation. Known for his aggressive demeanor, Burke was accused of hindering the FBI's involvement in the case, raising questions about why he wanted to limit external help. Burke was later imprisoned for unrelated charges, including assault and obstruction of justice, but some theorized that his interference had severely delayed the investigation into the serial killer. However, no evidence has emerged to directly connect Burke to the murders. John Bittroff. In 2014, John Bittroff, a Suffolk County resident, was convicted of the murders of two women in the early 1990s. His profile as a serial killer and the fact that he lived near the dumping grounds led some to wonder if he could be responsible for the Gilgo Beach murders. However, despite initial speculation, no direct evidence has been found to link Bittroff to the Long Island serial killer's victims. The belt, a key piece of evidence. In a surprising move in January 2020, Suffolk County Police released an image of a black leather belt found near one of the crime scenes. The belt had the initials WH or HM inscribed on it, leading investigators to believe it may have belonged to the killer. This was one of the first pieces of physical evidence to be publicly disclosed, and police hoped that someone in the recognize it. However, the release of the belt image also raised questions about why it had taken nearly a decade for authorities to make this information public. Some speculated that police had deliberately withheld evidence, either to protect the integrity of the investigation or due to internal mismanagement. The revelation reignited public interest in the case, with online forums buzzing with speculation about the possible significance of the belt. One of the primary challenges in solving the Long Island serial killer case has been the remoteness of the crime scenes. The bodies were dumped in isolated areas, and the killer appeared to take significant precautions to avoid leaving behind forensic evidence. Additionally, the victims' transient lifestyles made it difficult for investigators to track their movements or identify the exact point at which they encountered the killer. The involvement of sex workers also posed challenges, as many of the victims' families were reluctant to come forward, and the victims themselves often lived on the fringes of society, making it harder for police to piece together their stories. As investigators continued to explore potential links between the Long Island serial killer Lisk and other unsolved cases, a chilling theory began to take shape. Some speculated that Lisk may not be confined to Long Island alone. The modus operandi targeting vulnerable women, particularly sex workers, and disposing of their remains in remote areas bore similarities to other unsolved cases across the United States. In particular, law enforcement began investigating possible connections between Lisk and unsolved murders in Atlantic City, New Jersey. In 2006, the bodies of 4 women, all of whom were involved in sex work, were found in a drainage ditch behind a motel near Atlantic City. The women had been laid in a row, face down, and their bodies were positioned close to a major road, a disturbing parallel to the Gilgo Beach victims. While no definitive links were ever established, the similarities led some to believe that the Long Island serial killer may have traveled between states to commit his heinous crimes. The unsolved murders in Atlantic City gave rise to the theory of another serial killer. Dubbed the Eastbound Strangler, 4 women were found strangled and left behind a motel in 2006. Though no definitive evidence linked these murders to the Long Island case, the geographic proximity and similarities in victimology raised the possibility of a connection. Both killers seemed to target women in vulnerable positions, most of whom were involved in sex work, and left their remains in isolated, off-the-beaten-path locations. Could it be that Lisk was responsible for murders across state lines, eluding capture for decades by spreading out his crimes? This chilling possibility continues to be explored by law enforcement. The debate over Shannan Gilbert's death continued to stir emotions among both investigators and her family. While the official stance of the police was that her death was likely accidental, possibly caused by a combination of panic and disorientation after her 9/11 call.
What is after me? Please.
Are you in Suffolk County or Nassau County?
I'm in Long Island.
Where on Long Island are you?
No. 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 No, stop, no.
Shannan Gilbert, a Craigslist sex worker and resident of Jersey City, New Jersey, traveled from Manhattan to meet a client, Joseph Brewer, at his home at 8 The Fairway, Oak Beach, New York. Shannan was driven to Oak Beach from Manhattan by her driver, Michael Pack. Neither one was familiar with the area. Neither one had been there before.
Shannan Gilbert, a Craigslist sex worker and resident of Jersey City, New Jersey, traveled from Manhattan to meet a client, Joseph Brewer, at his home at 8th and Fairway, Oak Beach, New York. Shannan was driven to Oak Beach from Manhattan by her driver, Michael Pack. Neither one was familiar with the area. Neither one had been there before. Her family remained steadfast in their belief that she was a victim of the Long Island serial killer. Gilbert's mother, Mari, became a tireless advocate for justice, calling for a more thorough investigation into her daughter's death. In 2015, Mari Gilbert commissioned an independent autopsy, which suggested that Shannan had suffered injuries consistent with strangulation, further fueling suspicions that her death was no accident. The tension between the family and law enforcement escalated, leading to legal battles and public protests. Tragically, in 2016, Mari Gilbert was murdered by her other daughter, who had a history of mental illness, adding another layer of heartbreak to the family's long fight for answers. Shannan Gilbert's case became emblematic of the challenges faced by families of the victims battling not only the trauma of loss, but also what they perceived as systemic indifference or incompetence from authorities. Her disappearance and death remain a point of contention in the overall investigation, with some believing that solving her case could unlock crucial clues to the identity of the Long Island serial killer. As the bodies continued to be discovered, investigators began to link the Gilgo 4 victims, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello to earlier unsolved cases. The discovery of Jane Doe 6, whose partial remains had been found in Manorville years earlier, suggested that the killer's reach extended well beyond 2007. Manorville, located in eastern Long Island, became a key site in the investigation. The dismembered remains found there hinted at a more brutal phase of the killer's modus operandi, raising questions about whether the same person had refined his methods over time. Detectives were troubled by the killer's ability to elude capture for so long. Not only did he avoid leaving significant forensic evidence, but his choice of victims, often transient individuals with minimal digital footprints, made it more difficult for law enforcement to track his movements or build a solid timeline of his activities. The FBI had taken a more active role in the investigation, working alongside local law enforcement to reevaluate evidence and explore potential leads. Psychological profilers suggested that the Long Island serial killer was likely a man in his 30s or 40s at the time of the murders, someone who was familiar with the South Shore area and may have led an unassuming life. He may have had a job that provided him with the flexibility to travel and commit these crimes without arousing suspicion. The methodical nature of particularly the use of burlap to wrap the victim's body, suggested a killer who was organized and possibly had some form of law enforcement or military training. Additionally, the careful disposal of the bodies in such a remote area indicated that the killer was deeply familiar with the terrain and knew where to hide his victims without attracting attention. As forensic technology advanced, investigators began to re-examine the evidence using modern DNA analysis techniques. The hope was that, much like the Golden State Killer case, genetic genealogy could provide a breakthrough. By 2023, authorities had begun submitting DNA profiles from the crime scenes to genealogical databases, hoping to identify relatives of the suspect. The Long Island serial killer case has garnered significant media attention over the years, with numerous documentaries, podcasts, and books dedicated to unraveling the mystery. Programs such as The Killing Season and HBO's The Long Island Serial Killer: A Mother's Hunt for Justice have brought the case to a wider audience, keeping it in the public consciousness. Online sleuths and true crime enthusiasts have also played a role in keeping the case alive. Websites like Web Sleuths and Reddit have dedicated threads where users discuss potential suspects, theories, and developments. The victims' families continue to advocate for justice, urging law enforcement to find the killer and bring closure to their loved ones' cases. By 2024, the advancement of forensic technology had injected new hope into the investigation. DNA evidence, once too degraded to analyze, was now being revisited with the help of advanced forensic techniques. Genetic genealogy had revolutionized cold case investigations, sparking hope that it could finally reveal the identity of the Long Island serial killer. Along with DNA advancements, investigators were increasingly using geospatial technology to map the killer's movements, developing a clearer understanding of where the bodies had been left. By analyzing cell tower data and historical weather patterns, law enforcement aimed to narrow the time frames of the murders and possibly discern patterns in the killer's behavior. The public's fascination with the case persisted, fueled by documentaries, podcasts, and online forums dedicated to unraveling the mystery of the Long Island serial killer. The victims' families continued to advocate for justice, pressing authorities to keep the investigation active and ensure it didn't go cold. As the 14th anniversary of Shannon Gilbert's disappearance drew near, the case remained one of the most chilling and confounding unsolved mysteries in American history. The communities of Long Island and the families of the victims held on to hope that technological advancements and renewed efforts from law enforcement would eventually lead to the identification and capture of the elusive killer. While the perpetrator's identity still eludes investigators, the haunting legacy of his crimes has left an indelible mark on the victims' families, forever altering the peaceful image of Long Island. The case stands as a grim reminder of how vulnerable lives can be, and how darkness can silently linger beneath even the most serene communities.